Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And today's episode, we're going to talk about mineral rights news for March of 2024. And Justin, before we hit record, we were talking about some of these articles, and it really spans the, extreme in terms of what's going on in the oil and gas industry and the impact on oil and gas mineral rights. And that's from natural disasters to extreme positions on climate and legislation and everything in the middle.
You said it, Matt. It's an interesting month for the news, for better or worse.
Yeah, and I guess we should just dive into this first article. I know that this has been on a lot of people's minds lately with the major wildfires occurring in Texas. And in fact, the largest wildfire in Texas history is going on, and it's only, I think, a couple of percent contained. Over 1 million acres have been burned so far. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how the oil and gas production has been affected by these Texas wildfires?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And just a terrible thing to hear, and hearts out to all the first responders who are working on that. But it sounds like from this article here, Rigzone was asked if the wildfires had affected oil and gas output. And they said, we've not seen much overall impact on oil and gas production over the past few days. And the article continues to go on where they asked TIPRO's president, Ed Longnecker, said, given the sheer magnitude of wildfires, some disruptions will likely occur. So, Matt, it sounds like, though it's not having a major impact, anytime that there's a disruption like that, we're going to see some level of impact to the production.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there will be some impact. I guess, obviously, the most important thing is that people are safe. I can imagine how difficult it is if you have property or if you live in the area affected by the wildfires. Obviously, we want to make sure everybody's safe, and that's the first priority. But then when 1 million acres have been burned by this wildfire, that there is eventually going to be some impact on oil and gas production. It may be somewhat minimal. This area doesn't produce a significant amount of the state's oil and gas. There's definitely some gas production. In fact, I have some royalties up in Lipscomb County, just north of where the edge of this wildfire is. And there's a fair amount of gas there in the Texas Panhandle up into Oklahoma. But yeah, I think that's, the one bright spot, silver lining to this terrible natural disaster is that there has not been a massive impact on oil and gas production yet. And hopefully that will continue to be the case. And I think they're supposed to get some rain this weekend. This is March 1st when we're recording this. So hopefully that'll help the firefighters able to get ahead of the fire and start to contain it. And people can go back and assess the damage and hope start to rebuild. So our hearts go out to those that are affected by this. And I saw this first on Twitter. There was a small oil and gas producer that had posted a video showing, scorched earth, and they panned over to the only standing oil and gas lease they had left. Everything else had been burned up in the fire. And so it was a sort of a sad video and just showed a little bit of the, personal impact that that's having on that gentleman's business. But, certainly this is an area that has a significant amount of agriculture, whether that's farmland, livestock. And I know people that are in that business, I can imagine it's going to be a long rebuilding process there. So we're thinking about you, and thoughts and prayers go out to those that are affected by this. But yeah, again, hopefully they can get it contained. And if for now, just in case you're wondering where the fire is located, it's 1 million acres. It's larger than the state of Rhode Island. I saw one statistic, but it's basically areas of the Texas Panhandle and Hutchinson County being sort of the center point there, up into the southern boundary of Lipscomb County and, Gray County. There's another fire going on. So a lot of fire activity in the Texas Panhandle. And again, hopefully they can get it under control soon.
You said it, Matt. Hearts out to those folks, and hopefully it gets contained and doesn't grow in any way. Matt, our next one here is something that, Colorado has really been pushing for the last couple of years now. But the headline is Colorado is set to consider a fossil fuel phase out. And here's why that's a big deal. And Matt, this continues to go on and talk about basically the two different sides to this this argument, which have kind of been the same. One side really wants to push the green initiative forward. The other side really wants to continue production. I thought it was interesting that Dan Haley, who is the Colorado Oil and Gas Association president, was really strongly warning a phase out. And his reason that he was pushing was that it would leave us reliant on other producers like Saudi Arabia or Colombia. And Matt, though that is true, it's interesting to see kind of how they've changed their position on how that they're communicating that to the public and going that direction with it.
Yeah, that's a very valid point because he's absolutely right. The quote is, if this bill were to pass, it would not only crush the economy, but it would hurt the environment by relying on foreign countries with lesser environmental standards to provide the energy we need. So the fact of the matter is that we rely on fossil fuels today to power the majority of the lifestyle that we enjoy, from the data centers that, while maybe they're buying carbon credits, but the grid is largely powered by natural gas, which is relatively clean burning. And the good thing about that resurgence in natural gas is it's taken a lot of the coal-fired power plants out of the system, and that's actually reduced emissions, even though we're using more energy. This is, I guess, more of a fundamental, almost a religious battle. This is kind of like the Crusades. We're not talking about the Moors versus the Christians. In this case, it's the keep it in the ground environmental movement versus energy enables human flourishing. So it becomes a philosophical debate. And I think this is intended to be just a shot across the bow. And there was another article that we'll link to in the show notes where they quoted State Senator Steve Fenberg, who's the state Senate president, in saying that the bill was basically a messaging bill and he did not expect it to pass in committee. And he said, I'm sure this is an explanation a lot of people don't want to hear, but I think that was important that they assigned it to the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee where they're expecting it to die. So I think it's maybe a messaging bill and perhaps setting the stage for a ballot initiative this November. And that is all indications as to the plans that environmental groups have for trying to get some legislation like this passed to try to stop the oil and gas industry in Colorado. It's very short-sighted. I mean, I consider myself an environmentalist. I do think we should protect the environment and hold people accountable. But at the same rate, I do believe in human flourishing and energy being the largest way that we can reduce climate-related deaths, and we can ensure that with affordable and reliable energy, that all humans have a chance to flourish. And there's billions of people on the planet that don't have access to energy, that are living day to day and don't have access to clean water. And because of that, and that results in a large number of deaths that could be avoided if, again, we look at how we provide clean and reliable and affordable energy to them, and clean being natural gas being probably the biggest bridge fuel until we have nuclear power, till we have a way to make solar and wind more reliable through battery backups and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of disconcerting here. The article does go on to say some things about how this would impact the economy, and then also how it could affect mineral and royalty owners. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Beyond everything that you just mentioned, which is we don't have the road yet to a clean, reliable source that will be able to sustain the energy that we need currently, there's a whole different question of government takings from mineral owners. If they remove the ability to develop this property, technically they're taking value from you and what you own in that property. And that's such a big side to this conversation that has yet to be addressed on how that would be handled, Matt. And this article mentions that, but it's not something that's really talked about very deeply. It's just usually mentioned like it is in this article.
That's true. It's just sort of glossed over. And the economic impact of this, whether it's right or wrong, just objectively looking at the economic impact, there was a report that the API did in 2019 that oil and gas supported 69,000 direct jobs and 271,000 indirect jobs in Colorado. And in 2019 was when this was looking at things. And then also, after factoring in the wages in those additional jobs and induced impacts, which is basically personal spending by those employees and business owners, and oil and gas in total contributed $46.1 billion to Colorado's gross domestic product, or around 11.7%. So a significant portion of the economy is affected by oil and gas, a lot of severance tax goes into to fund important programs like parks and things like that. So there's a lot of benefit that comes from that economic activity. But then to your point, Justin, the direct impact on the mineral and property owners in Colorado would be devastating. The value associated with minerals and royalties is tied to the revenue that can be generated when oil and gas is produced and sold. If you were to take that off the table and say, well, now that's not a possibility, you're basically, to your point, taking away that value associated with that future revenue generation. So effectively, that would become a taking without following due process. The article alludes to the fact that trade groups warn that it would lead to mineral rights owners to file massive lawsuit against the state for denying access to revenue. And I think in short order that would occur, and you'd have massive class action lawsuits, probably in the multiple billions of dollars, if not higher. And I don't think the state could afford to pay the bill, to stop oil and gas production outright. So people have private property rights that you need to follow due process in order to compensate them for actions taken by the government that could remove that value. So, yeah, lots of issues associated with this, and I'm sure it'll be stirring lots of debate. So I think it's going to be a big challenge for the industry and for mineral and royalty owners with interest in Colorado. You're going to need to let your voices be heard so that we're talking as just as loud as those environmental activists and saying, this is going to affect me personally, my family, our ability to either make a living if you work in the industry, or our property rights and our ability to support my family through the royalties I receive from the labor and from the hard work that my ancestors gave up in exchange for that property. So big issue in Colorado, and big fight ahead, it sounds like.
You said it, Matt. And as you mentioned, there's not much hope that this will pass through the Senate. However, the article mentions that it could find a second life as a ballot initiative, and that backers have already submitted language to put a similar 2030 permitting phase out before voters in November, Matt. So if you're a Colorado voter, that's certainly something to watch for, and certainly something the industry will be talking about. All right, man. So our next one here, I thought this was really interesting. So underground hydrogen deposits spur excitement in Washington. So until 12 years ago, most geologists believed there were no significant hydrogen deposits underground. After all, more than a century of oil and gas drilling had turned up nothing but trace amounts of the gas. But then an engineer digging a water well in the West African nation of Mali stumbled on a shallow deposit of pure hydrogen, and suddenly scientists had to rethink their thesis. The article goes on, Matt, to say that geologists now estimate that there could be trillions of tons of hydrogen beneath the Earth's surface, potentially creating a new clean energy source at a time that the world is rapidly trying to combat climate global change. And how much is realistically recoverable is yet unknown. And Matt, there's been some major money put into this. Bill Gates put in $91 million, the article mentions. It also goes on to mention a couple of innovative startups that are working on this and trying to explore the helium extraction. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions on whether this could be economic. Are we able to get them with current technology and produce them? So on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. We know that hydrogen is found underground. We know that now with some data points from a few examples, but can this be scaled to the level where it would attract the infrastructure development and so forth? Now, the benefit is if this occurs in an area where there is existing natural gas production, perhaps some of those pipelines could be converted to hydrogen pipelines, but you would need a significant amount of hydrogen. You would need it to be what's called a resource play. In other words, a large area that contains enough hydrogen to drill, significant number of wells to extract it and sell it in, commercial quantities to make it worthwhile for these companies to invest, the millions and billions of dollars that would be required to stand up a hydrogen industry. That is the real question mark. It's one thing for trace amounts of hydrogen that can be found underground, but if it's too deep, if it's too expensive to extract, then it's just not something that would make a significant impact as a new energy source. Of course, we should evaluate it and explore and see if we can, make the advancements to make it economic. If you think about where we were with oil and gas, we were just exploring the shale formations and seeing if we could combine horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing with the persistence You had companies like Mitchell Energy that pioneered that and made it economic, and now it's the norm, and we're exporting millions of barrels of oil and natural gas as a result. And so this could be a similar story if we get a feel for the amount of geologic hydrogen that's there and try to assess where this stuff is located. Right now, it's sort of a cottage industry. There's a few companies that received investment from seed companies, so it's really in a startup phase. They're not making any money. It's the R&D side of things right now. Shell, they mentioned, is conducting early stage research, and so you would need all of these types of partners to come together to try to figure out the technology that makes this difficult and expensive to produce, to make it economic, to where we can use it to replace some of that natural gas. So pretty cool. I think that one thing from a mineral and royalty owner perspective is this is just something to keep an eye on. We want to make sure if they do find hydrogen and they're starting to drill hydrogen wells and producing hydrogen, that we're getting paid a fair royalty, and that the terms of access to those resources is fair from the mineral perspective. Since we're the stewards of those mineral resources, it's ours to really manage and make sure that we're getting paid fairly for that. So that's the opportunity, and then also the challenge for mineral and royalty owners. I had a student of my mineral management basics course reach out recently. They were presented a lease for iodine, and it was the first time I'd ever seen an iodine lease. And this is an example of a similar situation. If they're presenting a hydrogen lease, it's very foreign in terms of the compensation mechanism. I think this lease was for the iodine, for example, was offering 3% royalty based on a certain cost per metric ton. And it was very convoluted and difficult to understand. And it seemed like a very low level of compensation relative to what we're used to normally for an oil and gas lease. So, something to be aware of it. We have all these new valuable minerals that are being explored for, like lithium, bromine, iodine, now hydrogen and helium and things like that. And so we need to make sure we're taking into account the future potential of those other resources and that we're reserving our rights there. So always a good question to talk to your attorney about when you're in that position.
You said it, man. Another thing I found really interesting in their article is it mentions that the U.S. Geological Survey has identified 2 veins of iron-rich rock that could hold large hydrogen deposits, one off 10 miles off the east coast between New Jersey and Georgia, and another in the Midwest running from Kansas to Minnesota. And there's other geologic formations that are similar in Australia, Brazil, Colombia, and Spain. And Matt, it mentions with that statement that until somebody goes in and starts drilling at scale, it's really unknown how much hydrogen is actually there and whether it can be extracted at a reasonable cost. So really interesting. It'd be interesting to watch what happens over the next, 10 years, 20 years with this. And maybe we'll be seeing hydrogen pipelines. Be interesting to see if that changes the political sway if it's a hydrogen pipeline rather than an oil and gas pipeline.
Absolutely. Reminds me of the Hindenburg incident, all over again. So hopefully
Right.
we've learned our lesson there. I'm sure we'd figure it out.
All right, Matt. So rig count. You want to go through this?
Absolutely. So we're sitting at 606 land rigs as of February 23rd, 2024. We're up 4 from last month. We were at 602 the last time we reported on this. So not too big of a change there. 2 additional rigs in Oklahoma, 2 in Texas. We lost 1 in West Virginia and 1 in Ohio, and have a new rig in New Mexico and then 1 in Alaska as well. So we're continuing to see the Permian Basin attract most of that activity. They have 2 additional rigs as compared to last time. And then the Granite Wash has 1, and Utica lost 1 as well. So pretty much the status quo. And I guess that's the expectation as we see oil prices remain stable. The big change that we did see in February, though, I want to say with natural gas prices, is we saw a significant drop in natural gas prices pretty quickly after the Biden administration announced the pause on new LNG export facilities. So I don't know if that was the direct cause and maybe some of the bearishness in the natural gas demand going forward. It has rebounded some. I think as of right now, we're sitting at $1.83. So it's definitely down significantly from where it was about a month ago. We were, I think, closer to $2.50 for natural gas prices. So a lot of uncertainty in the natural gas side. On the oil side, West Texas Intermediates sitting strong at around $80 a barrel. So that's good to see.
You said it, man. And, we were down early February around $70 a barrel. And so it has gone up just a little bit, but remained kind of stable, which the rig count, I think, reflects that. They're going for proven plays where they know what to expect. They know how to get return on investment, and it'll probably stay that way for now.
Yeah, and a reduction in drilling in those natural gas plays. It's not surprising to see a reduction in Ohio, where the Utica is. That's primarily natural gas, some liquids. So with natural gas being sort of at a difficult prices right now, I wouldn't be surprised to see a few more rigs drop in those plays, like in Pennsylvania, in Louisiana, where the Haynesville and the Marcellus. I would expect to see that continue to sort of slow down a little bit until natural gas prices recover. But yeah, and then those will probably shift over to those oil-rich plays like in the Permian Basin, which is where it's going strong still. So yeah, thanks again for listening. And to find links to the articles we mentioned in today's episode, you can do so in the show notes, which as always can be found at mineralrightspodcast.com. And if you find an article you'd like us to cover, send an email to feedback@mineralrightspodcast.com. Thanks again, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.